Hi, I'm Kingdangerously. This is Ftrhstry. We're remembering the next 100 years in our time vortex from the 2120s plus. This episode is about sunshades, the idea of blocking out bits of the sun to reduce the heat on Earth. The main reason we would do this is that global warming is causing damage all over the place, higher tides, fire, tornadoes, hurricanes, blah, 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 right? It's costing all of us a lot of money, a lot of grief, lots of refugees, lots of sinking kingdoms. It's not great. How could we ameliorate it? One way is a solar shade. So how it would work is we would blast some stuff up to Lagrange point 1, aka L1, which is a gravitationally stable place between the sun and Earth. It's where we keep most of our solar satellites for observing the sun. And either a large disk about the size of the surface of the moon, or like 16 trillion little disks about like a foot radius, float in this space and absorb about 2% of the sunlight hitting Earth. And that would be enough to basically wipe out technological global warming. It would be like a reset back to the temperature it was before humanity started spiking the levels by thickening the atmosphere, which traps more rays of light, more photons that hit the planet, can't get out of the atmosphere, so they're just warming the whole place up like a greenhouse, which is why it's called the greenhouse effect, or it was. People used to call it that. Not a thing anymore, not where I'm from, where we've virtually completely solved this problem in the 2120s. But back in the 2020s, it was all ahead of you. It was still a big thing, right? So let's talk tax, like brass tacks. How much would it cost to do this? The really good answer is a lot, but not impossible a lot. Like about a few $1 trillion every decade. Ish, like maybe it would cost $10 trillion to start doing this, then it would only cost a couple trillion per decade to keep it going, and it would cost that continually because you'd have to keep fixing stuff up there. You'd have to either like replace the satellites that fall out of orbit, or you'd have to repair, or you'd have to send more, or you'd have to just kind of like nudge things along. In the future, we've got like sort of undulating clouds of stuff up there that do things for us, and we're quite clever at, or by we, I mean our super intelligences are quite clever at aligning their solar sails such that they bounce photons off each other in like recursive waves, so that as one up front gets pushed further back, others around it push it back forward, and that happens in like a circular recursive fashion. It's quite beautiful. It creates this like math looking cloud, and it's how we're terraforming Venus when I'm from in the 2020s. But how it would work for like the early days, the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s, is that the world would shoot these things up, probably in a swarm, probably not one big moon-shaped thing. They'd have to be about 4 times the distance of the moon away. So, you know, pretty far. I think that's like 1.5 million kilometers or something. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, 4 times the distance of the moon toward the sun. That's L1. And that's where we would need this stuff. Several $1 trillion every decade for repair and maintenance. About the size of the moon, or as much as 4.5 times the size of the moon if you're doing it in a swarm, which only makes sense. And when you start asking how expensive is this really, you quickly find that it's sort of a savings, you know, or like a bare minimum investment, because the 10 to 50 trillion it would cost to execute this is significantly offset by the 20 plus $1 trillion that the world is going to lose in GDP just because global warming makes it so much harder to grow crops reliably. It requires fixing disasters when they happen, like cleaning up after the fire, tornadoes. It requires integrating large population motions between various nations and away from places that are no longer habitable, like island nations that are just getting swamped. So like, there's a cost to global warming is what I'm saying. It's like estimated in the early 20s to be around 23 trillion by 2050. Now, at the same time, the global GDP is growing. In the 2020s. It's already at 80 trillion. That's like how much the world makes, how much money the world produces every year, about like $80 trillion in the 2020s. And put that on a spectrum from the 1970s, when global GDP was only 3 trillion, and plot that on a chart toward the 2050s, when it's going to be more like 180 trillion, and suddenly like a few trillion a year starts to seem like not all that much. By the way, if you're curious, the breakdown of that 80 trillion is like 25-ish trillion North America, mostly America, about 30 trillion Asia, mostly China, and about 20 trillion Europe, mostly like France and UK and Italy and lots of other small but really great countries in there too. So comparatively to the world GDP, a few trillion a year, really not that expensive. The tech exists. It's going to get a lot cheaper though. Like specifically launch tech is going to get cheaper. Specifically mass drivers are going to make it much cheaper, but even rocket tech is like on its way down. So delivering these massive payloads that you would need to get 16 trillion little floaty circles up there, it's going to take a while. But the good news is it gets cheaper every year. So the more you invest, the less you're spending every time. And then you add to that the savings that you're racking up for the global economy, which maybe could be $200 trillion in 2050 instead of 180 if you solve global warming. And of course, this is just one of the ways we're going to confront global warming from the 2020s. You're going to confront it. We've already solved it in the 2120s. But other ways include growing lots of trees, moving water around by desalinating the oceans and irrigating deserts and bringing water to people to drink and stuff like that, pulling carbon out of the air. We talk about all this stuff in other episodes, so I'm not going to dive too deep there. But this solar shady thing, which seems shady now, is actually going to be a pretty key part of the pie. And in the long run, this kind of tech is integral to terraforming efforts and to moving energy the way we want it to move around the solar system and beyond. And of course, it ties in neatly with another amazing, important technology of the 21st century, which is going to be space solar. Just getting started. We'll talk about a specific military project regarding space solar in a future episode, possibly soon. Hope that inspired you. Hope you start agitating your local government to invest in sunshade technology or research and propose ideas yourself, do a little physics, pitch it to the UN. Maybe it'll be you that saves the world. It's not crazy. People save the world every day. Hope you have a good afternoon, morning, evening, future time. Maybe save your own day. Maybe save someone else's. Maybe allow someone else to save you. All right, that is quite enough of that. Shady out. Sun sail. Bye.